In the spring of 1991, a 3-year-old is playing with older siblings and cousins while her mom and aunt are inside. They wander from a grassy area to the playground, and the preschooler is conscious of the rules her mom has set forth for her, especially don't cross the parking lot on your own. Seemingly, this separates her from her older playmates temporarily, and in the short amount of time she's unattended on the apartment complex playground, she vanishes. At first, her mom considers that she may have wandered off, but fear sets in after she can't locate her. Since then, there has not been a single trace of the young girl, and her case is cold to this day, 34 years later. I'm your host, Megan, and each week on A Simpler Time True Crime, I cover older unsolved cases and challenge the idea that a simpler time means a safer time. This week, I'm bringing to you the unsolved kidnapping of Megan Garner. About 90 miles southeast of Dallas, Texas, is the city of Tyler, Texas. The vibe is a mix of small-town charm and steadily expanding suburban life. Tree-lined neighborhoods, a lively downtown with breweries and boutiques, and the ever-busy South Broadway corridor lined with shopping and restaurants. While it keeps its traditional southern roots, Tyler today feels more like a vibrant crossroads, part college town, part medical hub, part Old East Texas community with a dash of modern growth. It's known as the Rose Capital of America for its thriving rose industry and the annual festival that brings the community together. In 1991, the population was smaller than it is now, with about 80,000 residents. Life revolved around family, church, and Friday night high school football, while Broadway Square Mall, local diners, and barbecue joints were the go-to gathering spots. The University of Texas at Tyler and Tyler Junior College added a touch of campus life, but overall the city carried a slower, more traditional rhythm. Tyler, Texas, and Texas overall had a higher crime rate comparative to many other cities and states in the United States in the 90s, but overall people felt mostly safe in Tyler. And as such, it wasn't uncommon for kids to go outside and play without constant adult supervision. The older kids kept an eye on the little kids, and they just came in and out when they needed something. Life was like this for 3-year-old Megan Garner and her older brother and sister, 6-year-old Chance and 8-year-old Fallon. They lived with their mother, Melanie Jo Garner. Not much is known about Megan's father, other than that he and Melanie Jo were no longer together and that he lived out of state. The single mother and her children lived in the Casa Grande apartment complex, now known as the Ranch Apartment Homes, at 4400 Paluxy Drive in Tyler. Now, this is a pretty big apartment complex. It has several buildings and amenities, and it's adjacent to another large apartment complex that's now called the Evergreen Apartments. And on the other side of it is another apartment complex that's a little bit smaller, but still your standard kind of complex you might picture. So it's sandwiched in an area of a lot of rental units. And it had one of those typical apartment complex playgrounds situated in a little courtyard area. Just as a forewarning, the layout of this apartment complex is kind of tricky, and it's central to the discussion of this case. But I took some screenshots of the Google Maps and did my best to label it for you guys, so go check it out at simplertimecrimepod on Instagram. The location itself was great because Melanie's sister lived in the same apartment complex, and she had kids of her own as well. Megan's cousins, Nikki, aged 8, and Van, aged 4. This allowed the cousins to have a special bond and play and grow up together. On March 27, 1991, it was spring break for Tyler School District. The weather was sunny and beautiful, and many of the kids in the complex had cabin fever and wanted to get outside and play. Melanie described this to the local papers and said that there were a lot of kids playing outside and a lot of adults outside as well. Melanie's sister came over to watch a movie that morning at around 9:30. While they watched their movie, the kids went outside to play. At just 3'2" and 30 pounds, little Megan had shoulder-length, straight brown hair, big brown eyes, and was wearing a quintessential early 90s kids outfit. A long-sleeved pink, blue, and green t-shirt with horizontal stripes, pink corduroy pants, blue socks, and blue and white Reebok sneakers with blue trim. Melanie Jo and her sister had instructed the kids to stay in the courtyard playground area. The information about the events that morning, they vary from source to source, not in ways that are huge. I think they are those little details that can get convoluted and lost in the telephone game. But it does sound like at times some of the older kids wanted to explore some of the other areas outside of that courtyard area. And that's courtyard is where the playground is located. Megan was cautious and a rule follower, and she knew she wasn't supposed to cross the parking lot by herself. As I said before, I'll have some pictures of the area on the Instagram, but I'll do my best to describe it here as well. We don't know the exact building Megan lived in, but we know it was apartment 2065. The complex has a whole new name and numerical address pattern now, so I couldn't determine the exact building. But based on some of the statements from Megan's mother, Melanie Jo, to local reporters at the time, I narrowed it down to 3 likely buildings. From those buildings, you'd have to cross a small parking lot area that leads to another set of buildings across the way, and behind those is the courtyard and playground area. If you're facing the playground and your back is to the part of the complex that Megan would have lived in, there are more buildings to the left of the playground with their own parking lot, and that lot is next to Paluxy Drive, which is a busier 4-lane road, at least it is now. This means that if someone was there with ill intent and, say, watching the children, they would have had ample places to park a vehicle and have a quick getaway to a busy road. It also has really close access to a busy highway called Loop 323. It's just what it sounds like, a loop, and it's a state highway loop that spans approximately 19.7 miles, completely circling the city of Tyler in Smith County, and it connects with various major routes including US 271, US 69, State Highway 31, State Highway 64, State Highway 110, and State Highway 155. It just shows you this complex was right nearby this conduit to all these major routes that could then take you out of the area quickly. Now, like a typical preschooler, Megan did come inside a few times, and it's unclear if other kids were with her at the time, but you'd presume yes, because we know she was trying to follow those rules about not crossing the parking lot by herself, and she would have had to get from where they were playing to get back inside. She came in once for raisins and some water, and then another time to use the bathroom. She then headed back out to play. This was the last time Melanie Jo saw her daughter. The other kids kept playing, and my understanding is they didn't stay immediately in that playground area. And because they were sometimes going in areas that were a little outside of the bounds to Megan, she wanted to stay put and keep playing more independently at the playground. This next part of the story also has a couple variations. Some source material says that the kids came back inside to get some water and said that Megan didn't want to join them because she didn't want to cross that parking lot, so she stayed at the playground, and then Melanie had said, "Go get her." Another variation says that they thought she already had come upstairs, and then the same thing, Melanie instructed them to go out and get her. In both instances, the kids went back out, searched for her, and came back to say they couldn't find Megan. One part I stumbled upon in my research was that one of the papers described a last place Megan was seen was by this fence that separated out. It was on the other side of the playground, away from the area that her apartment home was. And it was towards this row of duplexes that led into the next apartment complex. And on the Instagram, I have a picture. I found the fence line on Google that they're talking about. But what is a little confusing to me with that is that this would have made her cross another parking lot by herself, which didn't make a ton of sense. And there wouldn't really be any reason for her to be over there. But there is one source material without a lot of context that does mention that. So I want to say it, but I don't have any good reason. And it seems out of alignment with her other behavior of not crossing these parking lots by herself. I know it's frustrating to have these discrepancies. Sometimes I run into cases like this and I hesitate for a moment in sharing them because I can't get all the information ironed out. But this is the reality of the messiness of these older cases. This is what cold case detectives are working with. And on top of it, you have to remember now years have passed, so people's memories can be hit or miss now, even if I was to revisit it. Megan's case is one that hasn't been told as often as other similar cases, and maybe it's for this reason, because of all the discrepancies and lack of information. But her case still matters, and the answers are still out there, so on we go. After this, Melanie Jo and her sister went out looking and quickly recruited other adults in the complex to help them look. The kids had come back after not being able to locate Megan at around 11:30 a.m., and it was around noon when Melanie realized Megan couldn't have gone that far on her own. It was then that Melanie Jo first placed a call to police. Police responded quickly and with numbers. They recognized how dangerous it was to have a 3-year-old out there by herself. In the scenario where she wandered off, there was busy traffic nearby. And then they had to consider the scenario that somebody had taken her. From the get-go, they were up against a lot. Apparently, no witnesses saw anything. And like I said, there were a ton of adults and kids out that day. It was beautiful and school was out. But sometimes that busyness creates almost a cloak or camouflage for a predator. Everyone is so caught up in their own business, they don't think anything of a person luring a child away, and it may not even look like that's what's happening. It just looks like a dad walking away with his daughter. And this may be what happened. We don't know. One of the things that makes apartment complexes kind of tricky is just that there's a higher concentration of people living in a small area. While some apartment complexes have a great sense of community, it can be hard to truly know who all your neighbors are when you're just living with so many different people around. And in this situation, having neighboring complexes on either side, it's just a tough situation. The kids that Megan was playing with did not share any account of strange people around them or anybody talking to them, nor did they say anyone seemed to be watching them. But kids are kids, and they aren't necessarily looking for that kind of thing. That's what's so terrifying about all of it. That first day turned into night, and Melanie had to imagine the idea that her daughter was out there somewhere, maybe in the dark outside by herself and scared, or even worse, that she was with some sort of monster. The overnight passed, and with the dawn of a new day brought new challenges. For 3 days after Megan went missing, it rained continuously. Still, mounted patrolmen, firemen, police officers, and helicopters combed the area searching for any sign of Megan. There were also volunteers doing foot searches, but with the lack of clues and inclement weather, that search was called off by Thursday afternoon, 1 full day after Megan disappeared. Megan's father was contacted, and he came to Texas to help with the search efforts himself. Like any case, polygraphs were given to Melanie Jo and Megan's father, and they were quickly ruled out as having anything to do with Megan's disappearance. When the first few days of preliminary searching turned up nothing, the search was stepped up even further. Each moment that Megan was not found, the statistics around her safe return dwindled. Specialized search teams came in from North Richland Hills and Anderson County. Still, not even a hint of a trace of any sign of Megan or a single witness. As Megan's face was plastered on the news, that would soon change, and police would get their first potential sighting of Megan Garner and a suspect in her abduction. Witnesses came forward to say that just 4 hours after Megan would have been abducted, they saw a man in a local grocery store with a girl who matched the description of Megan. I'll have a sketch of this person on the Instagram, but he was described as white, around 35 years old, around 5'8" or 5'9", and with a muscular build. The man had dark eyes and dark hair, had about 2 days worth of beard growth, and was wearing a maroon trucker-style hat that said Nakona Boots on it. He had on blue jeans and a long-sleeved khaki shirt, and witnesses felt that the man worked outside. Tyler police told the Tyler Courier-Times that they didn't consider this man a suspect and would just like to speak with him. They said, quote, We would like to contact him for more information about the case. We are asking anyone who has seen this man to call the Tyler Police Department. I do always laugh when police play it off like that because obviously they very clearly wanted to speak to this man as a potential suspect. There's no way that they think that he just came across this girl by happenstance, but, they're trying to play it cool and maybe it'll work in some scenario. But not in this one. This man never came forward and police have never been able to identify him. No further calls came in matching this man's description or seeing a man like this with a girl who looked like Megan. Megan's mom continued to work with friends and family to pass out local flyers and put herself out there to try to get anyone to come forward with information. She didn't hide from journalists and reporters, and sometimes her interview quotes, you could tell she was just surviving moment to moment and answering things with her stream of consciousness just flowing. At one point, the day after Megan's abduction, she was interviewed by the Tyler Morning Telegraph and was talking about how she couldn't think of anyone who would want to hurt Megan. She said, quote, "That's what's so bizarre about it. There's no one who would want to do that. And I think it's very unlikely she would have run off, but then none of this is possible. It was about lunchtime, so she would have been getting hungry," end quote. So you can just tell she's thinking out loud and trying to orient herself to this unfathomable situation she's in. On April 5th, news broke of a cruel situation happening to Melanie Jo, something all too familiar to many parents in missing persons cases. A 30-year-old man named William Gordon Hunt approached Melanie Jo while she was passing out flyers. Unbeknownst to her, he was actually in possession of a long-bladed knife. He told Melanie that he knew where Megan was, and for $400, he could bring her back within 30 hours. Lieutenant Robin Roberts said, quote, "At this point, we don't believe he knows anything. We believe he was just trying to extort money from the girl's mother," end quote. William Gordon Hunt was considered a drifter at the time, with loose home addresses tying back across the country to California, and no settled housing in Texas. They arrested him for unlawfully possessing a weapon, and that was that. Undeterred by the cruelness of opportunistic people, Melanie Jo Garner was pleased when, that same week, the Tyler Area Pawnbrokers Association put up a $1,000 reward for information. By week 2, the FBI had entered the investigation as it became more and more obvious that Megan Garner had not fallen victim to a tragic accident or wandered off and gotten lost. And at the same time, another family resource came in to help support Melanie Jo and Megan's family. David Collins flew into Texas from California, representing the Kevin Collins Foundation. David had lived in Melanie Jo's shoes, and years later, he still was. David and his wife Anne were a big Catholic family. They had 9 children together, and Kevin was their 7th born. On February 10th, 1984, Kevin had basketball practice that afternoon at his parochial school, and he typically went with his brother, but he was homesick. He made it to practice fine and left a little early to catch the bus home. He was last seen at Oak Street and Masonic Avenue at the bus stop, waiting for the number 43 bus. Witnesses reported seeing him talking to a blonde-haired man with a black dog. He never got on the bus, and he was never seen again. Over the years, there have been strong suspects and many theories, but Kevin has never been found, and his family is still without answers. His case was on the cover of Newsweek, and he was one of the first kids to appear on a milk carton. Wrapped in grief, Kevin's family wanted to do something to help any parent who would be in their shoes in the future, even if they never wished that their circumstances fell on anybody. And thus, they established the Kevin Collins Foundation. They worked up close and personal with families, helping to get the word out there, doing mailings across the country, you name it. And that's exactly what they did here. As David Collins arrived in Tyler, they set up a local office for tips and information and to work out of it. And then at a press conference, David said, quote, "There is nothing other than volunteers, people from your community here to assist this family in giving Megan a chance to be returned to her family." He went on to say that it would require a tremendous effort to spread information about Megan's disappearance. He also said, quote, "This is a huge country. One doesn't really realize the difficulties we're talking about until you get into this and start working on it." Back home, David Collins had led the push for laws and reform in California for missing and exploited children. The organization he founded had been brought in to help with around 120 cases all across the country, up to this point in 1991, and 16 children had been brought home alive. He stressed that they weren't an investigative organization, rather a vehicle for information and getting the word out. You have to remember, families back then did not have social media and a 24-hour news cycle that featured cases to help get the word out. And while today's technology can be a double-edged sword, it's helpful in this regard. Despite staying there for weeks and doing countless mailings, cold calls, outreach, and hours of work, no substantial tips came in about Megan's case. As a side note, the emotional toll of being involved in horrific missing persons cases year after year took its toll on the Collins family. They ended up amicably divorcing, just growing and surviving in different directions after the life-changing loss of their son. Amidst a decline in donations to the organization and the emotional toll, David closed the organization in 1996. On the 2-month anniversary of Megan's abduction, a candlelight vigil was held. In attendance for support was Janice Norwood, mother of 12-year-old Kimberly Norwood from Hallsville, Texas. Hallsville is a little less than 50 miles outside of Tyler. According to the website The Charlie Project, Kimberly was last seen at approximately 5:15 p.m. in her hometown of Hallsville, Texas. She was walking with 3 friends in the Caney Creek Estates subdivision at the time. The 4 children went their separate ways, less than 1 mile from Kimberly's family house. She never arrived home and has never been heard from again. It's presumed that she was abducted in the short walk home in this isolated area. One thing I saw reoccurring in this case was a bond and support of families of missing or murdered children. I've heard family members in this space before say it's a club you never want to become a member of. But the bonds formed by those who uniquely understand the pain and circumstances are undeniable. And this was shown again when, in October of 1991, 7 months after Megan's abduction, another Tyler child went missing. At the end of October of 1991, an 8-year-old boy named Chad Choice went missing from his bedroom. Soon after, the family began receiving ransom notes, but he was never returned. Chad's mom, Karen Choice, and Megan's mom, Melanie Jo, ended up connecting on a lot of initiatives together. They both had young children abducted from what they thought was a safe city to raise their children in. There were some big differences in the cases. The Choice family was terrorized and taunted by Chad's abductor for years. As I stated, he had been taken from his bed. His sister had actually noticed her set of house keys had gone missing the day prior, but hadn't thought too much of it. Not only did Chad's uncle receive a ransom note at his place of business, Chad's mom would get phone calls or notes left on her car saying that Chad was still alive and out there, but they needed to pay a certain amount of money for his return. Even with trying to arrange a drop-off and exchange, Chad was indeed never returned. Just as a content warning, this next part is graphic, so skip ahead 30 seconds if you need to. In 1996, his skull was left in a plastic bag on the family's doorstep. It would take time for forensics to conclusively identify him, but it was indeed Chad Choice. Soon thereafter, a family friend named Patrick Horn was arrested in the case. He was just 17 at the time. It turns out he had abducted Chad and shot him that same night. His attempts at ransom money were to pay his own drug debt, but he never had any intention of returning Chad. I know I just jumped ahead there, but I know my listeners, and I know you'd want to hear what happened in Chad's story. It's just honestly one of the most horrible cases I encountered. And because the circumstances of the cases were so different, it's unlikely that Megan's abduction was connected to Chad's at all. But it's also important to remember that this is our hindsight now, knowing everything that happened to Chad. At the time, in real time, they were unsure. It was rare to have 2 abductions in Tyler of small children at the same time, So that seemed hard to ignore those similarities. But Chad was an 8-year-old African-American boy taken from his bedroom, and Megan was a 3-year-old white toddler, seemingly taken more opportunistically from her apartment courtyard. Melanie Jo had no idea who took her daughter and was not receiving any communication from the perpetrator. But she was at the receiving end of hearing horrible town gossip. At one point, there was a rumor that Megan's mutilated body had been found behind a local daycare. That completely was false, turned out to be untrue, but it was understandably distressing to Melanie Jo and her family. And of course, Melanie Jo's parenting was put on trial at the court of public opinion. But my podcast is called A Simpler Time True Crime for a reason. This was very common for kids to just go out and play because the perception was that everything was safe and there was no national news alerting you to these abductions. In 1991, we're at a bit of a weird spot in the safety teaching timeline because in the 80s and 90s, it did bring in that whole stranger danger, panic, and there was a lot more visibility to abduction all of a sudden, particularly with a few high-profile cases in the news. But I think that families still just thought that they would teach their kids about stranger danger, which we know differently about how to approach kids around safety now. And they thought that otherwise, once they did that, it just probably wouldn't happen to them. And I don't fault families for feeling that way. In fact, most cases, kids were safe. But as I always say, for the families it did happen to, it happened to them completely, 100%. They were the statistic, and it's something that forever changed them. One thing I appreciate so much about Melanie Jo was that she was candid about this in interviews. She told the Tyler Courier-Times how she was first suspicious of everybody she encountered, all of her neighbors and anyone around the complex, but she also realized she couldn't pinpoint that and wishes she had just taken different precautions. She said, quote, "At first I was very suspicious of everyone concerned. I thought the abductor might have been someone visiting someone else. But as I became more aware, I learned abductors often stake out areas and are totally unconnected with anything going on there. I didn't realize the danger or just how close you should watch your children. I didn't realize how quickly it could happen until it happened to me." On the 1-year anniversary of Megan's abduction, while Chad Choice was still missing, she told the paper, quote, "This can happen to anyone at any time. There is still an abductor in our midst, and until someone finds Megan or Chad, we should be extra cautious." She would talk about how it pained her to see children unsupervised and how after what happened to her, she just wanted to tell all of these parents to be more careful and not to trust. Leads dwindled, but the push for answers didn't. Megan's face was on nationwide mailings and on TV shows. Her case was even profiled on America's Most Wanted. But detectives were honest when they said they had nothing new to go on. Then something shifted. In July of 1993, Tyler Police Chief Larry Robinson confirmed that they were interviewing a suspect in Megan Garner's abduction. He couldn't give any other details other than an ongoing probe between the FBI and Tyler Police resulted in the lead and interrogation. He said, quote, "Because of the nature of the case, I want to be very careful until we get to a point where we can take other action. The suspect is not charged with anything at this time, just being interviewed," end quote. For 4 days, they questioned the suspect, but the day after interrogations ended, there was disappointment. Assistant Tyler Police Chief Bob Bond said the suspect had been cleared and was not a viable suspect in the case. The man was from out of state and had been held in Smith County Jail on a warrant from another case. Investigators and Megan's family were disappointed, but hoped that this would refuel new leads in the case. But it didn't. By 1994, Megan's mother, Melanie Jo, had married a new man. They moved into a new place. It was too painful for her to keep a placeholder bedroom for Megan, so she didn't. She told one news outlet that if Megan was found safe, they'd blow up an air mattress and all sleep in the same room and be together, and that it would be such a celebration for the need to find a bigger place that they would just be excited. Melanie discussed how Megan's brother Chance was too young to digest a lot of what happened, but that Fallon, who was 8 at the time, internalized her sister's disappearance and felt immense pain, wondering if she was dead or alive or was coming back. Every few years, Megan's name would pop up in an article about missing children from East Texas. At one point, Karen Choice and Melanie Garner Jackson worked with a woman named Betty Edwards to form the Texas Association for Stolen Children after they identified 25 cases of unsolved abducted children in the area. In the mid-90s and then sporadically thereafter, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children would update Megan's age-progressed photo to capture what she might look like if she were still out there. But beyond that, there haven't been many more new leads. Melanie is still alive and in touch with police regularly. Just a few months ago, a CBS News affiliate in Tyler did a spotlight on Megan's case and interviewed a former detective on the case, Jim Holt. He was the lead investigator from 2016 to 2022. He said there's been an active detective assigned to the case since 1991, and that they're quick with any follow-up. Detective Holt told reporters that Megan's DNA is on file and that they've ruled her out against Jane Doe's. They also have ruled her out against people who have come forward thinking they might be Megan Garner. Detective Holt also said that they had the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, or NCMEC, come in a few years back, and they handed over their case files to NCMEC and had them review everything and make suggestions. He really hopes that someday in the future, they will get the break they need in this case to make an arrest or at least get answers. Someone out there who knows something and is willing to come forward. You never know if the information you have could prove to be helpful. Maybe you knew someone who had a similar outfit to that man at the grocery store back then, or that unique hat. You could have encountered somebody as a child yourself in the Tyler area at that time, and maybe this run-in with this person was inappropriate or creepy, but you never shared it. Maybe you dated or were married to someone you thought could have been responsible, or maybe someone's confided in you. If you have any information on the disappearance of Megan Garner from Tyler, Texas in 1991, please contact the Tyler Police Department at 903-531-1000. This has been another episode of A Simpler Time True Crime. If you appreciate the work I'm doing, I urge you to share this podcast with a friend or on your social media. The podcast has grown so much, but I still want to reach more people. Leave a 5-star review on your preferred listening platform and subscribe. If you'd like to go above and beyond to support the podcast and have the means to do so, I have a $5 a month supporters club, and the link can be found in the bottom of the show notes. Case suggestions can be made to simplertimecrimepod@gmail.com. As always, thank you so much for listening, and I'll be back next Monday.